Rego is an AI-powered waste diversion platform that's creating cleaner communities by redirecting bulky trash like furniture and textiles into the hands of nonprofits and donation centers, trash that would have otherwise ended up in landfills. Rego is a company that makes waste removal easy and makes tracking and reporting sustainability data simple. The company has already helped entities like apartment buildings, universities, construction companies, and other organizations redirect over 120,000 pounds of furniture to local nonprofit organizations instead of landfills. We've really loved this example of a circular business because Rego highlights the power of the reuse end of life strategy, turning someone's trash into someone else's treasure. Josh proves with his platform that recycling trash isn't the only way to go and highlights the fact that we'll need to take advantage of all methods and strategies in order to reverse the overshoot. In this video, I talked to Josh about why he started Rego and what he sees for the future of waste diversion. Enjoy. So I'm super curious about what sparked your interest in waste diversion in the first place. How did you get into this?
Yeah, it's a great question because I didn't come from like a climate tech background or circular economy background or anything like that, or any insert other buzzword here. It was more so to solve a problem that I was running into pretty consistently, and then I realized a lot of other people were also running into the same challenge. Stemming around what to do with all the stuff that isn't coming with you when you move. And really, I came from a sports and construction background, which are two industries that are obsessed with timing and coordination. And it turned out that has a ton of overlap with, circular economy and how it should work in supply chains. So really, in the beginning, I didn't necessarily think I was jumping into things like waste diversion, climate tech, circular economy. It was again just trying to solve for these very basic human challenges that we run into when we're moving, and then just realizing that a lot of those challenges came down to timing and coordination. And so I felt like just with the background from sports and construction, that if I put enough elbow grease into figuring out the timing, the moving pieces, all the coordination, and then surrounded myself with the right people, that we'd eventually come up with a really good solution that would make the moving process a little bit easier, but also then keep a lot of unnecessary things from going to landfills, prevent a lot of people from paying unnecessarily high chunk removal fees, or in my case, prevent people from paying unnecessarily high storage fees because I would just end up storing a lot of things that I felt guilty about throwing out and would spend a lot of time trying to, donate or sell them. And so, yeah, a lot of it was actually pulling on, learnings from other industries, wanting to solve this problem, and then realizing I was in a whole new world of waste diversion and the circular economy.
I love that. I love kind of the innocence of it in a sense, because I think a lot of impact driven projects or companies start off this way. You just notice something is missing, and then you end up in this whole new industry, in this whole new space, right? That comes all later. And I think it gives hope to anyone who wants to solve an issue that they can and kind of learn on the go. You don't have to know everything beforehand. I want to get into how Rego actually solves that issue of waste diversion. Why is this method useful compared to other methods? Or maybe there wasn't any solution before Rego.
Yeah. So on a very high level, uh, Rego solves the problem by matching people who have unwanted stuff with nonprofits and resellers who want that stuff, and then hauling in delivery companies to provide the transportation of that stuff.
Mm.
Um, it's really a platform like if you want to get into the fancy business side where you'd say, hey, we're connecting used furniture supply to used furniture demand and distribution. So it seems incredibly simple on the surface, but what's unique is how we can handle scale and volume, because most of our operations are fully automated and allow us to operate by eliminating a lot of unnecessary costs throughout the process. So, for example, we just talked about how things like storage in these situations become very expensive. And so it becomes really important to nail the timing down at scale. It's easy to do it with like one or two items, but then how do you do it with 100 or 200, 300 in multiple cities? And that's where we become really unique. And then we also solve for tracking of the items. So, historically, a couch getting kept out of the landfill and going to a nonprofit wasn't really tracked other than maybe a donation receipt. And there wasn't a really robust understanding of what impact that would have at a landfill. So, we also started putting some math and numbers behind that, guided by, publishings from like the EPA and other resources, so that organizations, people, nonprofits, whoever, could actually start tracking this from an environmental perspective too.
Mm.
So, um, there's a lot to dive into there, but I always try to like look at it from the most simple, lens possible. But then in terms of, better or worse than other solutions, I always look at things as an evolution of existing solutions. Like, are you getting to better outcomes because you're making something more simple or more affordable, or a combination of the two, which is really the best. But I think where we get asked a lot is like, what is this like compared to recycling or breaking down an item for parts? And I think, both solutions can exist because they're both pieces of a larger pie, and one isn't necessarily better than the other. They just fit different use cases depending on the materials you're dealing with and the condition of certain items. Something's like perfectly good and can definitely be reused, not a lot of damages, then you reuse that item. It takes up less energy as long as it's done in a reasonable manner. But if something's like a combination of metal and wood, and the wood is destroyed for some reason, it can't be repaired, then you can take the metal legs off and find another use case for that. So
Mhm.
yeah, there are a lot of different solutions and ways to do things. We just look at one specific slice of the market or the pie that we can exist in, and then just focus on making that easier, more affordable, and more practical for people to do.
Mhm.
Mhm.
I love that so much. Like, I really like Rego because of that specifically. I mean, you have a lot of solutions out there that are recycling, but people overlook simple things that you can do. Why not donate it to someone who needs it? I feel like when we're tackling these issues, like, people want to do the most innovative or new or fresh thing, but oftentimes that can be really complicated. And in this emergency that we're in right now, I think we need stuff that's practical, that's fast. So I think this should not be overlooked, and I want people watching this to not be afraid or to shy away from solutions that might seem, quote, too simple or too obvious, because they're just as powerful. And like you said, we need to attack the problem from different perspectives, from different points of view. So I really enjoy that approach, honestly, and I think it should be done maybe a little more instead of going for like the new fresh thing.
Yeah, one thing I actually want to press on there too. What's interesting is like, if you have if you have people that want to bring something new, really trust your gut. And if you have a lot of familiarity with the problem, really lean into that. Because what's interesting about how we work now is we get a lot of praise for being a very simple, practical solution, but we actually took a lot of heat in the early days from people telling us that we were over engineering something. um, you know excuse me, when we would go out for like investment, I mean, we took a lot of heat for that, for people saying, "Oh, you're just, forcing something into the market that's over-engineered. Like, I can just call this donation center, I'll just call this junk company," because maybe that's what they did 10 years ago, but they didn't realize the market had drastically changed, and the way things used to work don't apply anymore. Especially if that investor hadn't moved themselves in a long time, or maybe they're just incredibly wealthy, and it's not a big deal for them to pay a really high chunk removal bill. Um, so it's now come full circle where that applause comes in for finding the simple solution, but in the beginning it was a lot of people who felt very opposite. So yeah, if you are bringing something new and innovative, I think just finding the way to make it as simple, easy, and practical as possible is very powerful.
Mm. That is so interesting to hear
Yeah,
how things change.
yeah, it's funny.
I'm super curious about how you're doing this in reality. So I want to
Yeah,
ask, do you have any favorite projects or examples that you've worked on, or clients that you want to talk about? How does this look in everyday life?
yeah. So our most basic use case is we work with big apartment buildings when people are moving out. That's our bread and butter. If you have an apartment building with very high turnover, or you're in a college area and a lot of students moved out and don't really know what to do with their stuff and they just kind of dump it behind. Um, Basically, through a photo system, we can identify in scale where all these different items should go and then how they should get there in the most cost efficient manner. Um, and that's a really big component to how we can tackle a very big apartment building with hundreds of units, or a college with hundreds, sometimes thousands of people, just kind of abandoning things. And so, um, my favorite project, though, to like hone in on that question before I go down different rabbit holes, is each year we do a holiday donation drive. You know, it's this odd thing where furniture donations to nonprofits in certain cities just go down closer to Christmas. Um, and so we always look for innovative ways to drive donations. And again, the first few years it was a little bit challenging to get participation in buildings to want to jump in. But this year, we had 25 buildings participate. We drove over 80 big furniture items donated to Habitat Restore, plus like 20 massive bags of clothing, like filled to the brim boxes and things like that. If you could picture those clothing boxes, to our friends at Affiliates Thrift. And yeah, I would say that's like one of our favorite projects to do year in and year out. And we see that the demand for those donation drives with us is growing really fast. So that's essentially just like this citywide effort between us, apartment buildings. In the future, schools are going to start jumping in, we believe, and the nonprofits who also help us with a lot of that coordination and pickup efforts. So I would say that's um, one of my favorite projects.
So it's really interesting and cool to hear that you have these types of clients.
Yeah,
You mentioned that the demand is kind of growing and you're expecting maybe to see schools jump in on that in the future. I want to ask about how you feel in general that the industry is evolving. What do you think the
yeah.
trends are in this industry?
We always say we're eventually going to get the machine where you put a couch in and a bar of gold comes out on the other side. Um, but no, all kidding aside, when we look at the industry or the market or whatever other like startup-y buzzword you can get in there, we actually believe that one of the biggest impacts can come in from the manufacturing side of furniture. So the rise in modular furniture is going to help that a lot. Meaning like, hey, if you need a new couch, or let's look at an example of half of your couch gets destroyed for one reason, maybe like your cat scratched it. Well, typically it's very hard to find somebody that wants a couch that's totally destroyed by a cat. But with the rise in modular furniture, now you can really just solve for one piece of the couch and not need to dispose of an entire couch or buy an entire new one. Or if you destroy the fabric, you can essentially replace the fabric covering or something like that. Um, right now, a lot of those solutions are still new. They're still in their infancy. They're still trying to figure out, what materials need to be in the furniture to make it compliant and sellable because it needs to have like certain fireproof ratings. But I think as the rise of modular furniture and better manufacturing processes come into play, that's ultimately going to have a trickle down effect into the circular economy that will have one of the bigger impacts in the space. Um, I think when you look at long-term recycling solutions and things like that, it becomes a lot more expensive and very challenging because couches, for example, have so many different types of materials, so many different glues, so many different staples, that it becomes really hard to deal with on that side. So yeah, I'm excited to see the innovations that are happening on the manufacturing side, that we can essentially play a very big role in as people are in the process of trying to like cycle out new pieces of furniture. Actual parts of furniture are going to be a big thing for us in the future. Um, and I think there's all new resale channels that open up there as well for consumers. That'll be big. But again, I can go in a lot of different directions there. But to boil that down more concise, I would say really looking at the manufacturing piece of the pie is where I think most of the innovation will come in.
Hmm. That being said, for those who are looking to create those projects of the future, which
Yeah.
is what I'm very passionate about, is empowering these people. Do you maybe have any thoughts or advice for change makers in general who want to tackle this linear take, make, waste model, get more into circular design? Do you have any thoughts about that?
Yes. My biggest piece of advice is you have to make the solutions as practical as possible to the way that people are living their lives.
Mhm.
If you're doing something that's incredibly deep tech, or you're like launching things into space, that may not be as applicable, right? But focusing on people trying to introduce new consumer solutions or B2B solutions, you really have to be thoughtful about how they operate their day to day, how they operate their lives, how they operate with the things around them, right? Or how they interact with the things around them. Because the reality is, like, if you want to drive some sort of positive outcome, the vast majority of people are not going to pay a lot more to do it, or they're not going to go completely out of their way to do it. You will get a small amount of people who are willing to do that because they're very, very passionate about it, but they're few and far between, and ultimately the impact becomes very small and very boxed in, and you kind of get back to that echo chamber of a lot of people saying, "Hey, everybody should be doing this," right? But as innovators, if we want to see that impact, it's up to us to make it as easy, practical, and as affordable as possible for people to do, so that we're not expecting them to completely change the way they live their lives. Um, I think about Uber a lot, which is a very cliche example in the startup world. Some people love it, some people hate it in terms of the analogies and examples. But if you really think about them going back 10, 12, 15 years ago, whenever they launched, there was already a massive amount of people that needed a ride from point A to point B, and they had a ton of different ways to do that. Um, Uber just gave them a better, more practical, and in some cases, a more affordable way to get from point A to point B. There are a million ways that Uber could have failed if they didn't do that right. Like if they just forced a more expensive option in, or they just forced you to do something wildly different. But they made it so that it was an easier solution to something you were already doing, and you didn't need to do some crazy change or spend a lot more money.
Mm.
And so I think about that example all the time, and I think even today it's still as applicable as ever, even though most people now have, especially if you're younger, lived most of your life with Uber in existence. And so you don't realize how much they really innovated and changed that market. And then there are obviously other examples in, like, with DoorDash and again, making these services and utilities as easy as possible. We just need to take that same approach or that same mentality into the circular economy or climate tech, or insert other green or social initiative there.